I'd like to thank my comrades Oliver Lewis for inviting me. The current tuition fee system is a mess and it lacks public support for a reason. It is my view and current Labour Party policy that tuition fees should be scrapped and higher education should be funded for via general taxation. And I want to make the case for that after first outlining the failures of the current model. First of all, although important, I'm not going to argue that tuition fees are quite the most significant class barrier to higher education. The United Kingdom has one that has has the highest link between parent and child earnings of any OECD country, and the dropout rate for lower income students in higher education is the highest it has been for 5 years. And the most significant factors driving this are the government's abolishment of grants, their abolishment of the educational maintenance allowance, and of course the rising cost of accommodation fees. So although I reject the centrist argument that we have a limited pot of money and free education falls a bit too low on our list of redistributed priorities to want spending money on it, it is at least somewhat consistent. But what I dislike is the right-wing co-optation of this argument by people whose priority of spending that £7 billion is not to increase education spending, but to give further tax cuts to corporations and inheritance tax. If you're pro-tuition fees because you have an ideological commitment to a smaller state, then be honest about it, but it's not a progressive policy. The current fees model is highly flawed. Firstly, as has been well mentioned by Danny, tuition fees are not particularly effective at taxing the rich. Families who can pay off the 27 grand immediately incur far lower costs than middle income graduates who pay off the fees gradually and incur a huge interest fee charges. The way interest rates are actually applied to tuition fees is borderline illegal because the government, unlike any real loan company, has the power to retrospectively hike interest rates to extract more money from graduates. Now at an eye-watering 6.3%, this leads to annual interest fee payments even higher than the annual Durham Union membership charge. More cruel is the fact that those who temporarily drop out of university end up paying significantly higher fees. But why should those forced to take a break from higher education because they've encountered financial difficulties or experienced mental health problems, only to then come back a year, be made to pay more than those who managed to stay the whole 3 years? Essentially, if your aim is to create some kind of graduate contribution system that is progressive, tuition fees are a terrible way of doing so. And it's unsurprising because for the Tory party, the 9k tuition fees were never intended to be progressive. They were intended to further their neoliberal dream of extending market forces to all aspects of our lives. And the attempt to create a free market in higher education has evidently failed. Virtually all institutions have chosen to charge the maximum 9k rate. There is no opportunity to adjust your preference of what course you want to study at a later date, and strong evidence to suggest that charging lower fees actually deters students because then courses are seen to be of a lower quality. If you insist on means testing for higher education, tuition fees are a terrible way to do so, and you should vote in favour of this motion and be supportive of some kind of straight graduate tax system. Nevertheless, I do want to end by making the case for free education. I've probably heard the disingenuous argument that free education is regressive almost as many times as the Durham Union has had racism scandals.
Points of information.
Yeah.
All your members have been attacked by Momentum.
Moving on. The reality is, once we consider the amount of money that will be paid back under the current system, that won't be paid back under the current system, the abolishing of tuition fees will cost only £7 billion a year in addition. And the UK is currently one of the lowest taxed countries in the G7, in the developed world. The Labour manifesto, if implemented, would still mean lower taxes as a proportion of GDP than Canada and Germany, let alone Scandinavia. So there is clearly more scope for increased welfare and early years education spending than even the Labour manifesto promised, without the need to renege on our commitment to free education. And it is the case that we do have a number of government services that are provided university and funded through general taxation. There is rightfully no health tax on the NHS, there is no police tax for those that report crime, and there is rightfully no further education tax for those who pursue college or technical education. Let's avoid this false dichotomy between spending money on higher education in the short term and the NHS and welfare spending. The point is, there should be no financial trade-off involved in the decision to pursue higher education. Why should a doctor who studied medicine be taxed higher than someone who's inherited wealth from their parents? Why should those who dislike the career path they're on be deterred by the state financially from retraining later in life? Education should not be a commodity to be bought or sold. Commodities are produced either out of greed for a privileged quality of life or fear of destitution. The effects of commodification on higher education have not been a shrinking of the state, but a drive towards more bureaucracy and the surveillance of academics. This is the inevitable result of trying to marketise something that is inherently resistant to quantification. With a need to sell their product, academics are forced to pump out papers to meet the inane artificial standards of the research excellence framework, rather than free to research independently. Academics are encouraged to improve how their product is represented by state-imposed systems of assessment, rather than to improve the product itself. Imposing commodification on something that cannot be commodified leads to more time filling in forms, stressing about surveillance, and less time teaching and researching. Psychologically, the marketisation of higher education pits students against lecturers, and industrial action is seen to be the swindling of an agreed-upon financial transaction, rather than something necessary to the common long-term goal of protecting academic rights, attracting talent, and furthering human knowledge. The left needs to be bold and stop cowering behind right-wing arguments about a trimmed-down, means-tested welfare state. We need to stop thinking in binaries about the immediate distributive impact of policies in isolation from one another, and instead consider how, as a whole, we can change society by making our taxation system radically more progressive and by banishing the influence of market forces from areas of public life that we deem to be important. And just as Labour created the National Health Service, Angela Rayner will in a few years' time build the National Education Service, and this country will be all the better for it. Thank you.